So I'd like to hand over to Landmark Director, Dr. Anna Kay, who's going to tell you a bit about this wonderful project. Anna.
Thank you, Alison. Thank you very much for that. And good evening to everybody who is joining us this evening. It's a real treat to see so many of you here on this rather dark February evening. And I hope that you will feel, as we do, at the end of this, really excited about this project that we are launching this evening. So just quickly to give you a little bit of a sense of how we're going to use the next sort of 45 minutes. So I'm just going to say a little bit briefly at the beginning, just by way of context for this project. And then I'm going to hand over to Caroline, who's going to tell us all about the building in question and the way we've approached it, some of the challenges, some of the opportunities, and the way in which we are hoping to intervene there. And then I will come back at the end and say a bit about where we are now and what we need in order to be able to start work. I'm really pleased that, as well as Caroline being here, we're joined by Kate Holt, who is waving and who is the project surveyor for Landmark, who is leading on this project. So Kate's not going to be doing a presentation, but she's going to be around through the talk and available to help with questions at the end as well. So that'll be very good. And we've also got Alison and Laura joining us from the Landmark development team, and Alison will field the questions at the end. So it's an all-female team this evening, which is very appropriate given the subject matter that we are dealing with. Now, Wentworth Woodhouse, which is the magnificent palace that is our location for this evening and this project, is a building that I'm sure that many of you on this call will have heard of. Many of you may have been there and know about it. Speaking for myself, I first came across it, probably like others, through reading a wonderful book called Black Diamonds, written by Catherine Bailey. I think it was about 10 years ago I read it, which is a most fascinating sort of conjuring up of the stories of the various families who lived at Wentworth Woodhouse over the years, and sort of incredibly atmospheric account of the history of the building. If you haven't read it, I really recommend it. The other way that it hoved into view for many of us was in the sort of jeopardy, if you like, in the mid 20 teens about what was going to happen to the building. It's a spectacular, enormous, great, magnificent 18th century country house, but it had really come to the end of its line in terms of the condition of the building and the very great uncertainty about its future, when in 2017 the amazing group of brave and bold and courageous pioneers formed the Wentworth Woodhouse Preservation Trust and bought it with help from the government and all sorts of sources to try to save it and to give it a new future. And even we at Landmark, who feel like we know one or two things about what's involved in rescuing old buildings, and we like to think of ourselves as being courageous when it counts. But we looked on with admiration and awe at what they were taking on, such as the size and scale of the building. We were very much applauding from the sidelines, but then shortly after the Preservation Trust took it on, Martin Drury, who was the Landmark Trust chair for many years and was a member of the Wentworth Woodhouse Preservation Trust, approached Landmark to see whether we would be willing to help them to what they had bitten off, which is to say the business of trying to revive Wentworth Woodhouse. And it was really out of a willingness and an appetite to get involved and to support them, and in following visits with Martin, that we homed in on this particular little element of the site as being the one best suited to Landmark's model and characteristics. I mean, it's worth probably just saying briefly that for Landmark, when we look at and think about any new project, we really have three key criteria in mind always. One is, how significant is the building? Is it important? Two is it at risk? Is it in need of us? Does it need saving? And three, would it work as a landmark? Would it make somewhere that people would want to stay, enjoy staying, and therefore be viable and financially sustainable for us. And against all three of those counts, Wentworth Woodhouse, got a big tick in the box. And so, as well as it being something that we really wanted to lend our support to, it also absolutely measured up across all those criteria for us. So we've been looking at it and thinking about it since since about 2019. Obviously, COVID intervened, and the project pipeline that many of you will know about. So it's now that its time has come, and we are really, really excited about this one. I think it's something we've, between all of us at Landmark and those of us who are involved, feel is going to be really a standout, special and exciting project. I'm not going to say any more at this point because I think that's the perfect moment to hand over to Caroline to explain why. So thank you very much, and I shall see you all on the other side.
Thank you very much indeed, Anna. And so let me share my screen, as they say. And there, I trust that you're now seeing my title slide. And thank you all very much from me as well for joining us tonight to hear about this latest landmark rescue. As Anna said, Wentworth Woodhouse has long been a cause célèbre of the conservation world, a mighty mansion of former power and influence, as significant for the collections it once held and the landscape that the Rockinghams created there as for its architecture. Today, most of those contents have been dispersed, but even what's left in its setting constitutes an assemblage of truly international importance. In the wider landscape, there are follies, monuments, designed parklands, gardens and villages for you to explore, all forming part of this historic, exceptional landscape. But the main house has also been one of the most intractable conservation conundrums for decades, and Landmark could not be more delighted to be playing a part in its rescue. First, a quick orientation. The long east facade of Wentworth Woodhouse that we're looking at here is one of the longest in Europe, and it's flanked by two towers, the North Tower and the South Tower. And externally, they look very similar, but internally, they're quite different and they serve different purposes. The North Tower, with the service yards behind here, held lodgings for the estate steward and also the workings of an enormous clock. And it has interconnecting floors. The South Tower, by contrast, to be the new landmark, is quite different. The dial on this tower is a wind indicator rather than a time clock, and its floors do not interconnect. Instead, the first floor was intended initially from the start as a muniments room where the estate records and deeds would be kept. And the upper chamber of the South Tower backs onto the terraced gardens and was intended, as we will see, for elegant pleasure. There are two curved blocks known as quadrants that extend out from, that connect the towers to the accommodation wings here that extend out from the central portico. And for some reason lost in the midst of time, the south wing has long been humorously known as Bedlam, not because there's any record of such use, but perhaps because it was once where bachelors or maybe children were lodged. And another remarkable fact to introduce here is that we're actually looking at two great houses. Because this mighty east front was begun as an addition to a brand new Baroque mansion that was barely complete when the first Marquis decided that it was already old-fashioned and that something grander was required. So this wonderful Baroque house was begun by Thomas Wentworth Watson soon after he inherited his title and the estate in 1723, and Thomas eventually became the first Marquis of Rockingham. But the first Marquis's grand new house reflected the tastes of his father's generation, and even during its construction, it began to be rather looked down upon by the followers of that arbiter of taste, Lord Burlington. In the 1720s, Burlington spearheaded the passion for the classical architecture promoted in Italy by the Renaissance architect Andrea Palladio and absorbed by the aristocracy on their grand tours. The style was further disseminated in England from 1715 with the first English translation of Palladio's Quattro Libri dell'Architettura, and Landmark's own Villa Saraceno is, of course, among the Palladio villas included in that work. The Quattro Libri provided the template for the next generations of the British aristocracy's buildings. So the first Marquis decided to start work immediately on the new and adjoining frontage to the east that would be more in keeping with the new taste and also with the family's rising fortune, and that still dominates today. The first Marquis completed its shell in around 1748, but he died 2 years later in 1750 and was succeeded by his son Charles, the second Marquis of Rockingham. The second Marquis died childless, and so at his death, his nephew, the first Earl Fitzwilliam, inherited Wentworth Woodhouse. The site would remain in Fitzwilliam ownership until 1989, but as Anna has hinted, a great deal changed meanwhile. So, the house was requisitioned by the government in World War II, and then in 1946, the grounds were commandeered by Manny Shinwell, the then Labour Minister for Fuel and Power, for open-cast coal mining, and this continued into the next decade. The slag heaps towered above the mighty mansion, even if the landscape is now, as you've already seen, miraculously healed. The Fitzwilliam family had meanwhile suffered a series of death duties and personal tragedies, and in 1949 they took the decision to lease the house to the West Riding Council, who in turn leased it to the newly formed Lady Mabel College of Physical Education for Women, part of the new idealistic approach to national education after the war. What a setting for PE this is. And the fine rooms became classrooms, and lesser rooms were ruthlessly adapted for institutional use. The college thrived for some 40 years, eventually merging with Sheffield Polytechnic, but meanwhile the maintenance need on the buildings was galloping on unaddressed. In 1989, the Fitzwilliams reluctantly decided to sell the estate. There was a courageous private attempt to rescue the mansion by an architect, but that fizzled out. And as Anna has said, in 2017, the whole site was acquired by the newly formed Wentworth Woodhouse Preservation Trust. Since then, this Wentworth Trust have embarked on a brave and brilliant multi-phase programme to restore the house, find new uses to ensure its financial sustainability, and embed it in the local community. And they've also made a wonderful series of short videos about Wentworth Woodhouse, its history, its restoration, including a couple on the South Tower. And these are all on YouTube. So if you'd like to find out more, I heartily recommend them to you. The Trust had made huge strides to great acclaim, but there's still an enormous amount to do. And so hence the approach to Landmark in 2019. Which means that we've already been working on our contribution to the South Tower for some years and have now taken out a 99-year lease on the South Tower. During COVID, a grant from the Culture Recovery Fund enabled an exemplary repair of the exterior of the South Tower by the Wentworth Trust, to which Landmark also made a contribution, thanks to our precious unrestricted funds from legacies and also from our wonderful patrons and friends, which enable us to be sometimes light on our feet like this. But that left the interior untouched. A replacement plywood ceiling has rotted away, and with so much else for the Wentworth Trust to do elsewhere in the mansion, further work to halt the decay here depends entirely upon Landmark. So let's turn now to the South Tower in more detail. First, its design. The architect Ralph Tunnicliffe was chiefly responsible for the design of the east front. Tunnicliffe was part of Lord Burlington's circle, but he died in 1736 when work had only just started. Before his death, Tunnicliffe had been helped by Henry Flitcroft, who was an intelligent carpenter whom Burlington mentored after Flitcroft fell from the scaffolding working on one of Burlington's projects. Burlington then sponsored Flitcroft, first as a draftsman and eventually as a fully fledged architect, so that Flitcroft became nicknamed Burlington's Harry. And it was Flitcroft who took over the Wentworth Woodhouse works after Tunnicliffe's death. The design of the mansion was closely based on an option for Wanstead House in Redbridge in Essex, shown at the top here. Wanstead was designed by the great architect Colin Campbell between 1713 and 1715 for Sir Richard Child. It was the purest, most Palladian house of its day, and it was also one of the biggest. Sadly, it was demolished in 1824. Campbell included 3 alternative designs for Wanstead in his famous book Vitruvius Britannicus, published in 1725, and the one shown here is the third of his options for Wanstead, and it's the most ostentatious of the 3. Specifically, it includes towers at each end of long wings that flank a central pedimented block. The first Marquis's assimilation of this published design for his own house is typical of how the Burlingtonian taste spread amongst the aristocracy. But the Wentworth design goes even beyond Wanstead. Note how the first Marquis required even longer side wings and broke them up by adding a pair of pedimented blocks, not included in the Wanstead design. And the sharp-eyed amongst you might also notice that the wings at Wentworth Woodhouse, as shown in the photograph, have an extra story. And this is not how they were first built, as you can see in this engraving, which dates from sometime in the early 1740s, showing the house before that extra story was added to the flanking wings. As first built, therefore, the Wentworth wings came only to the first string course of its end towers. The third story wasn't added to the wings until the 1790s, when Earl Fitzwilliam commissioned the architect John Carr of York to raise their height. And there are various anomalies between how this engraving shows the windows of the South Tower and how it was built. The fenestration of the upper window, for example, is shown here in the engraving as having triple light Venetian windows on the east and north side. But such windows do not exist on these sides, as you see. The east side, the front side, has 2 12-pane sash windows, and the north side had openings of a similar size and shape. These today are blocked and half obscured by the extra 1790s story. And in fact, the placement of the fireplace inside the chamber behind these openings suggests they may have been blocked all along. And we expect to find out more about this puzzle once we get on site. The only Venetian window that was actually built is this one on the south elevation of the South Tower. And even this has its mysteries. On the right here is a sketch for the window in Ye Tower that's attributed to Henry Flitcroft and dates from the 1730s. It's clearly based on the Colin Campbell design for the tower windows in the Wanstead 3 option on the left. But the sketch is still not quite as built, as you now see on the right. It's a gloriously elegant window, but the side lights have been narrowed to a single pane's width, and the proportion of the side lintels have therefore changed from the Palladian template. Who made that change? Flitcroft was heavily in demand across many sites in these years, and he can't have been on site at Wentworth Woodhouse very often to supervise. Perhaps he changed his mind? Perhaps the Yorkshire stonemasons just cracked on between visits and didn't quite build to plan. Either way, the South Tower is a resplendent end stop to that grand frontage. And you can see here that before the extra story was added, the ground levels meant that the only access to it was across this footbridge from the garden terrace to its left. The fireproofed vaults of the muniments room below meant it had no internal access originally. Indeed, the upper chamber may have begun life as a garden pavilion or almost a folly. The wall you see on the extreme left here is a revetment for the gardens beyond, and the walkway along it leads to the south terrace, including lovely views of the rolling South Yorkshire landscape and the Temple of Hercules at the far end. Excuse me. And this landmarkers will have access to after hours as throughout the grounds, so a perfect spot for a G&T. Going back to the elevated footbridge, this leads into the upper chamber from the west through a little brick porch that was added sometime after the initial phase, probably when John Carr added the story to the south wing. You can see how the door coins protrude above the roof of the porch, showing the porch clumsily added. The first Marquess was still at this date a mere earl, and so his coronet is conventionally shown with 5 of its 6 golden balls visible on the rainwater hopper, divided by 4 strawberry leaves. And so through the porch we go, noting the original Ionic pilasters as we pass through, originally external, and we come at last to the upper chamber of the South Tower. This lofty room, still magnificent even in its decay, has often been referred to locally as the Adam Room, but there is no evidence whatsoever that the famous architect Robert Adam had any involvement at Wentworth Woodhouse. The room is plainer than most Adamesque interiors and represents a more Yorkshire idiom. John Carr, who worked on the chamber, was known for his preference for working with York-based craftsmen, and the second Marquess too was a great supporter of local industry and craft. And let's meet the second Marquess, who inherited in 1750. He's a fascinating figure. As a 15-year-old in 1745, he rode off impetuously to join the Duke of Cumberland's campaign against Bonnie Prince Charlie's invasion with the Jacobites, an escapade that gained royal approval and may well have facilitated his father's elevation to Marquess in 1746. Charles was then sent abroad on the grand tour to mature a bit, where he acquired a taste for collecting, especially sculpture. He was keenly aware of the duty for public service brought by his lineage, which placed him as leader of the Whigs in Yorkshire. In an age of shifting political allegiances, the Whigs were a loose coalition of those who supported parliamentary rights against royal incursion and trade above petty political principle. The second Marquess was nevertheless something of a reluctant figurehead, but he was known as an honourable man and was twice Prime Minister. So his Wentworth Woodhouse really ranks with the greatest seats of political power at the time, like Lord Cobham's Stowe or Sir Robert Walpole's Houghton Hall, a place where 1,000 people might sit down for a dinner. The Marquess was pragmatic towards the rebellious American colonists in these years, considering it best not to antagonize them unduly, since both sides needed each other's trade. In his second term as Prime Minister in 1782, he pressed for the acknowledgement of the by now de facto independence of the United States. Undoubtedly, then, his role changed the course of history, even if this did lead to notoriety amongst his opponents that he had lost the colonies. The second Marquess and his wife were largely responsible for the interiors of Wentworth Woodhouse as we see them today. We're looking at, yes, the wonderful interiors at Wentworth Woodhouse, the main mansion, created by the second Marquis and his wife, the second Marchioness. This is the wonderful marble hall, and they include too the wonderful original setting for George Stubbs's painting of the Marquis's favourite horse, Whistlejacket. This is a copy. The original now hangs in the National Gallery in London. All this will be there for the enjoyment of those who stay in the South Tower. However, the most significant person in the story of the Tower is Mary Bright, the second Marchioness, whom the Marquis married when she was just 17 and he was 21. Mary was a local heiress, the only child of Thomas Bright of nearby Eccleshall. She was a lively and intelligent woman who managed her husband's two great houses. They also had a townhouse in Grosvenor Square in London, and indeed a villa in Wimbledon as well. So 3 houses, really. She had a lovely singing voice. She loved fine clothes, and she often appeared at court. Contemporaries acknowledged Mary as a skilled politician in her own right, sometimes acting as intermediary for her husband. Some Whig Party members wrote straight to her rather than to her husband, and she was described by herself and others as Lord Rockingham's secretary, the second Marquis's secretary. And the second Marquis himself was happy to quote back to her the description of one of her friends, that she was my Minerva at my elbow. After the Marquis's death, the great statesman Edward Burke wrote to her, "Your names ought indeed to go down together, for it is no mean part you have had in the great services which that great and good man has done to his country." So it's exciting indeed that we know from the Rockingham papers that the second Marchioness chose the upper chamber in the South Tower as her own parlour, and in the late 1770s set about decorating it to her own taste, working with the architect John Carr. She was clearly closely involved in the works. Here, for example, John Carr writes to the steward Benjamin Hall in 1778, "It will save much time if you will send the plan of the Tower room to my lady as well as to me, and let it be drawn to a scale to send to her. She wants to know the length of every side." The Marchioness had a fairly blank canvas to work on. We know from the estate papers that the plaster plaques on the walls were bought by the couple a few years earlier from London suppliers, the sculptor Joseph Wilton and the artificial stonemaker George Davy. They're neoclassical in idiom, and what's intriguing is that Lady Mary chose chiefly tales of feminine virtue for her walls. These 3 plaster lunettes came from Joseph Wilton, and they're based on scenes from a popular book of engravings of Roman tombs. Popular nevertheless. We know the subjects of all these lunettes, and in each case, a woman is the central protagonist. Above the door, on the facing wall, are these 2 large oval plaster plaques showing female personifications of spring and winter, also supplied by Wilton. And above the fireplace is another large plaque, this time of a woman sacrificing at a classical altar, sometimes interpreted as a Vestal Virgin and a popular trope at the time. And interesting perhaps that it's, this is a pagan image, it's not Christian. Below this, set in immediately above the fireplace, was the star of the room, a marble plaque carved by the great sculptor Joseph Nollekins, showing Timoclea brought before Alexander the Great. In 1762, Nollekins had been awarded first prize by the Free Society of Artists in the competition class for the best basso relievo, wrought in white marble, being an original composition of 5 or more human figures, the principal figure not less than 12 inches. The prize was 50 guineas, which would be worth over £5,000 today, and this enabled the 25-year-old Nollekins to depart to Rome to continue his training. The second Marquis supported Nollekins' career and his training in Rome, and there seems no reason to doubt that this is the same plaque, giving it even greater significance as the enabler of the career of this great sculptor. Timoclea was a Theban lady who was raped by one of Alexander's captains when Thebes was sacked in 335 BCE. The captain then asked her where her money was hidden. She led him into her garden, telling him the money was hidden down the well. When he stooped to look into the well, Timoclea pushed him into it and then hurled heavy stones down until he died. Seized by his soldiers and brought before Alexander for her crime, she acted with such dignity that Alexander ordered Timoclea and her children to be released without punishment. So here again we have a tale of female agency and virtue. The small 1770s chimney piece below the Nollekins plaque also survives, made of white and yellow marble, its Ionic capitals matching those in the porch. The documents show that the Marquis and his wife bought this together at auction in London, and then that she arranged with John Carr for its delivery north. We've also been able to build up a remarkably complete picture of other aspects of the room when it was the Marchioness's parlour. With great good fortune, a photograph of the upper chamber was included in an article in Country Life in 1924 that clearly shows the lost plaster ceiling. By enlarging this image and working with the finest plasterers, we'll be able to recreate this ceiling. We even know how the second Marchioness furnished the room, thanks to a detailed inventory of its contents taken at the Marquis's death in 1782. This tells us that the room had a stove with a register plate, several writing tables, 2 sofas, half a dozen side chairs with red and white linen covers, the Nollekins plaque, and all the other plaques described in detail. A Kidderminster carpet covered the floor, meaning a type of carpet that had a colourful, complex design, flat woven in wool and made in England rather than imported. And there were also 5 marble statuettes and 2 urns in the alcoves in the walls. And in this photo, not terribly good quality, but from the 1980s, when the chamber was in college use, we can see that at least one might still have been in situ then, a miniature reproduction of a famous life-size classical find known as the Farnese Hercules. We've also delved into the decorative scheme by commissioning paint analysis of walls and joinery. Minute flakes of paint were removed by the specialist conservator René Rice and then examined under a microscope. This has allowed us to establish a remarkably complete and consistent picture of how the various decorative schemes evolved in the room over the centuries. To our surprise and delight, the earliest of these, on the left here, emerged as a deep teal blue colour on the walls, with the joinery and the plaques and the wall plaques picked out in cream. This teal colour was applied onto a dark blue paper used to line the walls, and you can see it as the first layer in the sequence of colours shown top right. Teal was a very fashionable colour for walls in the 1770s and entirely suitable for a lady's parlour. Fallen fragments allow us to be sure that the cornice was made of moulded papier-mâché, another common material at the time. This cornice largely survives, although it needs careful and specialist consolidation. So all this has given us a remarkably detailed picture of the chamber in the second Marchioness's time. It's intriguing that the 1782 inventory doesn't include any lamps or candlesticks, so perhaps that room was always intended for daytime use only. The Marchioness was a well-respected plantswoman and botanist among her many other talents. She built a conservatory in the grounds for her specimens. So perhaps we can imagine her strolling in from the gardens to sit at her writing desk, catching up with her botanical notes or writing to her husband, as well as entertaining guests here. When the second Marquis died and the estate passed to his nephew, Mary left Wentworth Woodhouse to live in London. And this floor plan, made in 1832, shows us the upper floor of the south wing and upper chamber in this new Fitzwilliam era. By now, John Carr has added the extra story to the south wing. And possibly after Carr's involvement, as it's so crudely done, you can see that an internal access to the upper chamber of the tower has been added, leading into the small lobby or porch that has also been added. The upper chamber is now marked as Lord Milton's study, Lord Milton being the honorary title given to the Fitzwilliam heir. The top floor of the south wing is now given over for a schoolroom, bedrooms for two of the Fitzwilliam daughters, and a nursery bedroom. The distinctive curved room in the linking quadrant block is the governess's bedroom, with washing facilities and a housemaid's room off a short passageway. And it's these last three rooms that we will use to supplement the upper chamber to create a very special landmark for two people. There's lots to be done first, though, because as you see here, in the institutional college years, these rooms were crammed with toilet and bathroom cubicles. All these need to be swept away. The governess's bedroom will be reinstated as such in the landmark, with a bath and shower room in the former WC rooms. The housemaid's room will become the kitchen, leaving the upper chamber as a sumptuous sitting and dining room. Landmarkers will have their own private entrance, walking along behind the east frontage, as you see here, and across the side of the Baroque mansion at the end, before walking up a gentle slope to the footbridge, from where you get stunning views back across the lively roofscape of the main mansion. Crossing the footbridge and into the brick porch with its Ionic pilasters, this will become a small entrance hall, off which leads the steps that connect to the quadrant rooms. Along a short passage is the quadrant bedroom, the former governess's bedroom, now in a sorry state as a loo block, as we've said, but soon to become a handsome double bedroom with lovely views out onto the parkland and along the main frontage. Next door will be a shower room at the top, and off this, leading off, is the tiny room that we will make into an atmospheric bathroom with just enough room for a freestanding bath and a telescopic view of the roofscape through its quirky porthole window. The college bathrooms and partitions will be swept away from the former housemaid's room, which will then become the kitchen, with views out onto the ornate ironwork of the footbridge and the landscape beyond. And that leaves only the second Marchioness's parlour to be reinstated as closely as we can to evoke the room in her day as the sitting room and dining room, with an air source heating system for underfloor heating, supplemented by a wood stove in the wonderful fireplace, and state-of-the-art slimline heritage glazing within the existing windows. This will be a grandstand room, at once flooded with light and cosily warm. And to complete the sustainable energy measures, there will also be an EV charging facility and indeed Wi-Fi. So here you will be distanced enough from the excitements of the main mansion to enjoy your own quiet space while still having the attractions of the main house there to dip into and enjoy, and the gardens when you choose. Brought to life by our careful research and a rare example of undiluted feminine taste in the Georgian era, the South Tower will be a thrilling restoration to work on, and the team really can't wait to get started. But now I will hand you back to Anna, who can bring you right up to date with where we are and how things stand right now.
Thank you, Caroline, and well done for persevering. It's what we all dread, is finding that the technology fails us, and you did brilliantly. So, bravo from us all. So I hope that has whetted your appetite. It's wonderful to spend a bit of time unraveling the story of Wentworth Woodhouse, and to understand all of the many threads that make it up. Now, where are we and what next is what I'm coming on to talk about. So as we sit here in February 26, we are well advanced in all of our plans for the building, and we, as Caroline says, have taken on a 99-year lease, which is the longest lease that we could get on the building from Wentworth Woodhouse Preservation Trust. And we have put in our planning application for doing the works to the building, which we've had very positive noises about. So that all looks very encouraging. We could be in the position with the development and the programme of works to be starting work on site at Wentworth Woodhouse this year. We could be in the position to do that. The plan would be to go out to tender on the works at about Easter, and the results of that would be back in time to enable a start in the high to late summer. However, that is only possible if we can raise the remainder of the funds necessary to realise this project. Now, as you'll probably be familiar with as landmark enthusiasts, none of any of these projects are cheap. And lots of what Caroline's been talking about is clearly expensive work, dealing with a building of this importance, Grade 1 listed, obviously the scale of the building, the condition of the building, and the standards that Landmark seeks to meet, the environmental standards, and the presentation of the building. So the project as a whole, all in, including all fees, etc., will be £1.4 million. But the good news is that the majority of that is already raised. And that is thanks to, well, first and foremost, to the wonderful guardians of Wentworth Woodhouse who joined up in some cases more than 2 years ago now, to become guardians by supporting at the level of £6,000 each, whose early support is so crucial. So a big thank you to all of you. To a series of other supporters and donations that we have already received in. And thanks also to the extraordinary gift to Landmark some years ago of the H.B. Allen Fund from H.B. Allen, a fund which was given restricted to the restoration of historic buildings. So those things all taken together mean that of the 1.4 million, we have left to raise 317,000. So we're past the million mark. It's 317 that's left to raise. So the challenge is whether we can raise that with your assistance in the coming months, in the next 6 months, to enable us to start work on site, which would be so thrilling. I hope that you're already clear in your minds from what we've heard about the things which this project achieves and why we're so excited about it. But maybe just to sort of to kind of rehearse those again, just at a kind of high level. I think what this project really achieves is sort of 4 things, if you like. One is about restoring a wonderful piece of absolutely A-star Georgian architecture, connected with a prime minister, his extraordinary wife, a series of great architects, and a place of really outstanding architectural and artistic value, sculpture as well as architecture, which is very rare for us. Secondly, to be doing something really significant and material to contribute to the rescue of Wentworth Woodhouse as a whole. It's a discrete element that can be achieved and given a financially viable use, which is always such a critical thing in landmark use. Thirdly, it's something which is going to be really brilliant in helping to showcase and to pass on some really wonderful core heritage skills, heritage craft skills, which we know are so crucial in a series of different ways. But I draw particular attention to the recreation of that magnificent late 18th century plaster ceiling, which is going to be a real labour of love. And for those of you who participated in or followed us on the restoration of Cobham Dairy, seeing what that involves is really something to behold. And these projects are critical in making sure that mastercrafts men and women are passing these skills on to the apprentices who work on all of our projects. And then fourthly, and really not least at all in this case, is creating the opportunity to create a really wonderful knockout landmark that everybody has the opportunity to stay in. It will be a building for two, as Caroline said. It's a glorious sort of entity, and the sense of it as a kind of belvedere or pavilion overlooking that landscape is really powerful. It'll be a building, a landmark which welcomes dogs, as the whole site does, which is a very dog-friendly kind of a place. And it will give a sort of comfortable and elegant spot from which to observe and enjoy the ongoing process of the restoration of Wentworth Woodhouse as a whole, the site, the landscape, and so on. So it really is a project, I think, which hit so many buttons, and I really hope that you will feel, and listening to this, that it's something that you want to play a part in too. As you all know, every bit of help counts. It's what makes landmarks work possible. It's what makes saving buildings over 60 years something that we have done and are able to continue to do. So please do give some thought to whether you might be able to help. Big donations are wonderful. Becoming a guardian would be brilliant, but small donations are also really important and all make a difference. So I hope that you will give that some consideration. There is, needless to say, an email that will come hot on the heels of this call, which will have all the details about the project and how to support. There's also will be a beautiful printed pack that will come your way shortly, which allows you to look at it without having to be on a computer, which we can all see the shortcomings of this evening. And there's an opportunity to visit if you haven't done so on the 7th of March. We've got a special visit for those who are on this call. So again, the link will be in the email. So I leave you with the thought that all of these things that we have been speaking about this evening are within our grasp. And to say that I was struck thinking about it, that as Caroline was mentioning, the Marquis of Rockingham and the Marchioness were, absolutely sort of right in on the politics and the seismic moment in 1776 when the American Declaration of Independence was signed and the beginning of the United States as an independent country as opposed to a set of colonies was determined. And that this summer, on the 4th of July, it will be the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And there's going to be a tremendous amount of excitement and song and dance made of that. And it would be so wonderful if we could at the same time be marking the completion of the fundraising campaign for Wentworth Woodhouse on that red letter day and be sort of honouring its remarkable history with beginning work on the restoration. But all of that is in all of our hands in different ways. And I will draw to a close there with those words of encouragement. And I think we've just got a few minutes if there are any questions for those to be taken. And I think, Alison, you're going to hold the mic, as it were, in this.
Indeed.
This spot.
Thank you very much, Anna and Caroline. And yes, I'm sorry about the internet glitches, but thank you all for bearing with us. And thank you for the lovely comments in the chat. Everyone's very sympathetic, Caroline. These things happen. I think you'll agree it's an absolutely incredible project and we're really looking forward to it. So to kick us off, I think this is one for you, Kate. Somebody's asked about the wood burning stove in the fireplace and what was the decision around putting that in as opposed to an open fire?
I think this is the name of the Franklin stove is a little bit misleading. A Franklin stove is a kind of, as Caroline will probably tell you, is a very sort of particular to that time decorative grate. So it is actually an open fire. Its name is just misleadingly a Franklin stove. So an open fire is the intention.
Excellent.
Yes, I mean, just to chip in there, I think that might have been a slip of my tongue at the very end of the presentation as well. You'll remember from the 1782 inventory that there was a patent stove in the room. That was the name that was one name for a type of grate with a register plate that was actually invented by Benjamin Franklin, amazingly, founding father, etc. And yeah, as Kate says, it is essentially an open fire. So that it will not look like what we think of as a wood stove.
Excellent. Somebody's asked, are we intending to reinstate the teal colour as it would have been in the Marchioness's day?
Yes, absolutely. That's one of the things that was so exciting about the paint research, which is you're never quite sure when you do paint research what you're going to discover, obviously, and sometimes it is a bit well, not so disappointing, but the result is something that is quite sort of understated. But in this case, we were delighted, as Caroline has indicated, to discover this wonderful sort of Wedgwoody, it's not quite Wedgwoody, but nearly sort of Jasper Ware blue. So absolutely, we'll reinstate that, and it's going to be, I think, it's just fabulous transformation to imagine that lovely contrast between the deep blue and then the much paler colour of the sculpture and statuary.
Mm. And in fact, if you can visit, you'll see it's kind of hiding in plain sight. There are patches of it grinning through the peeling later layers, even now. And I think, we didn't dare to hope that that was the original colour, but turns out it is. So wonderful.
Somebody's asked about the ground floor. The interaction between Landmark and the tenants on the ground floor of the South Tower. How will that work?
So I was going to say there isn't, it won't be, they're not connected. So as Caroline was explaining, that it's sort of a bit deceptive because it looks like it's an interconnected building, but it isn't. The lower two floors are really completely independent, accessed completely independently. And one of the reasons that our scheme is the way that it is, and we looked at various different options, as you might imagine, is because there's a hefty great vault underneath the principal chamber that forms the sort of Marchioness's sitting room. So yes, there won't be any direct relationship between them. There will be other uses, as there will be on the wider site, but we're confident that we can operate completely independently of whatever goes on the lower floors.
Excellent. Somebody's asked, when will we be able to visit it? I think Anna's actually answered that. We're planning on having an open day on the 7th of March, and we'll send you more details about that in the following up email. I think there's something in here for Kate. Would you like to elaborate a little bit more about the heating system and just insulation of what's essentially originally a summer parlour?
So Landmark Trust have had quite extensive sort of thermographic testing and air tightness testing undertaken prior to taking on the Landmark and defining the heating strategy. So the building is actually remarkably airtight for a historic building. There are areas where we will have to improve those works, but our heating strategy is for an air source heat pump that will run all heating and all hot water in the building, and it'll be disguised in a little sort of lead enclosure on the quadrant roof. And that's been welcomed by Historic England, who are hoping it will be an exemplar project on how to kind of provide those facilities in a historic building. It'll also be added to by sort of natural insulation, and we're going to improve glazing and draft proofing around window frames. So we're hoping that it should be a renewable and kind of low energy building. It does also benefit from it's got quite a substantial thermal mass because it's quite a robust building. It's obviously got the big concrete vault. So hopefully, yes, all renewables, all running smoothly. The plan is to have underfloor heating in the drawing room and the entrance porch, and then it'll be radiators throughout the rest of the property, which we're hoping to reuse some historic radiators from the site if possible.
Thank you. Well, unfortunately, that's all we've got time for this evening. If you've got a question that we didn't get round to, please email in. We'll do our best to find you an answer. We love hearing from you, our supporters, and we always take note of what you've got to say. So do email in if something occurs to you afterwards, or you've got a question that we didn't have time to get round to. As Anna mentioned, there will be an email follow-up later this week with a recording of this talk if you want to watch parts of it back, and more information about how you can support the project and how you can go and visit. Finally, I'd like to thank Anna, Caroline and Kate for your time this evening. Absolutely fascinating talk. And thank you all for joining us this evening. I hope you found it interesting, and please enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you very much.